evening when I started feeling some minor headaches. You know, and I didn't make much of it. I thought I should get an early night's rest and get ready for the next day. We had meetings, but I woke up Thursday feeling very, very ill. I had a very high fever, I had high temperature, and by later that evening I had started slightly coughing, and I was feeling a little bit sore in my throat. As you well know, I didn't come into the office at all that Thursday. And so being conscious of the fact that I had been, after all, mixing and interacting with people, there was an anxiety over, could this possibly be COVID? And I looked on Google at the various symptoms and all of that for COVID. And I did notice that I had about 6 out of 7 of the symptoms. Now, mind you, these symptoms are very similar to malaria. I had, as a precaution, that same Thursday, started taking some malaria tablets. The 7th symptom, which I did not have, was shortness of breath or respiratory challenges. I never had that. You know, so I had started taking these malaria tablets, but at the same time, you know, people self-medicate at home. A lot of people who heard I wasn't feeling well as well also started sending all sorts of messages. You need to drink ginger, honey, lemon, vitamin C to boost your immune system and all of that. Which of course I was doing at the same time whilst taking my malaria medication. Now, any doctor will tell you that if you're taking malaria medication, you do not take anything vitamin C because it counters it. So all the malaria medication I was taking, in essence, was being countered by all the vitamin C I was taking to boost my immune system. And so by Sunday, I had finished my dosage of malaria medication. I was also still feeling very ill. So I went out and did a malaria test, which came out positive. And the guys even at the hospital were a little bit apprehensive about whether to administer the test to me or not to attend to me, given the symptoms that I was exhibiting. You know, but they did eventually, and they gave me my results. So I went back home with the malaria test results. Still very shaken and a little bit confused, because at this time I was not all quite clear about the vitamin C and the malaria tablets medication at the same time. You know, so I was anxiously awaiting the COVID test that I had done on a Friday. And Monday morning I got the call essentially saying that I was positive and that I needed to start making arrangements.
How did you feel at that point when you got that call that this is what you had been anxiously waiting for?
Well, so in all honesty, I was mostly concerned for the people who were living with me. Because even though I had said that my room should be isolated and nobody should come in, I was aware that even throughout that period, my kids were still coming in. My youngest daughter is 2 years old. She will come climb the bed. You cannot tell her, do not go and see daddy. She would wait until nobody is looking and she will sneak up on you when I'm sleeping or something like that. So definitely my highest anxiety at that time was, I hope this has not spread beyond my bedroom, beyond me myself feeling ill. By that time I was between Sunday and Monday, I'd kind of prepared myself that it is very likely that I might be positive. I had spoken to a few doctors and they had also said to me, like, look, if you haven't gotten your results in the first 12 to 24 hours, there is a possibility that they might need to repeat the results. And in all honesty, they think that I should prepare myself that it might be positive. So I was partly expecting by Sunday night the fact that it could be positive.
And so on Monday, I remember it was a Monday that you were eventually taken by the NCDC to the treatment center in Gwagwalada. At that point, from the trip from Asokoro, where you reside, to Gwagwalada, quite a distance away from the city center, how did you feel? How surreal was that experience for you that finally this stuff that we've been talking about, it's here, and I'm directly affected, and I'm now being evacuated to the treatment center?
Well, so I am the first person I know who directly had COVID, or as of that time, who had come out to say they have COVID. I didn't have any points of reference of what to expect. I was a little bit anxious. I was also very curious, to be honest, about what that experience might be like. I didn't know how long I was going to be there for. I knew that the fact that you have COVID is not a death sentence, that ordinarily you can isolate at home, but which was an option which I was exploring. Should I go to the isolation center? Should I stay? But I spoke to the lady at the one of the ladies at the NCDC, and she very strongly recommended that I go, and I just thought, for the sake of this and safety of my family members and other people they might be interacting with, maybe it is better for me to actually go away and ensure that they were safe. So I had packed my bag. I had everything I knew I would possibly need. So I was ready to go. At the time I was in the ambulance, that is when I started sending messages to members of staff and to everyone that I'm on my way.
I wonder what the expectation was actually when you were heading there, and what you saw there. Did it match the expectation you had at the treatment center in terms of the facilities available at the treatment center, basically even the room that you were admitted in, and the kind of interface you had with the doctors and the healthcare providers there?
So to be honest with you, upon getting to the isolation center, what I saw exceeded my expectations. The isolation center in Gwagwalada is a brand new facility. They had, every patient has its own individual room. In every room you had your air conditioning, you had your television set. There was constant light, and when there was no light, there was generator. It just practically didn't feel like there was no light. So in that sense, it was very comfortable. The facility was clean. I checked the toilets were clean. The doctors who came to attend to me, take my blood samples and do other tests, were courteous and appeared professional. I interacted with them, and they seemed like they knew what they were talking about. They gave me assurances that about 35 people or so had already successfully been treated at the facility, and God willing, the case will not be different with me. So I was very impressed, to be honest, from the very first moment when I got to that facility, both in terms of the physical infrastructure that was there and my interaction with the staff.
It's easy to handle a situation when you know you're the only person affected, but it becomes a lot more complex when you have close family members also affected. You were there on Monday, but on Friday, your father, the founder of DAAR Communications, was also diagnosed positive for COVID, and he had to come there. He didn't come there alone. He came there with his grandchildren, your daughters as well, and your wife, Doyin, as well. When they got there, when you learnt about it, and when they got there, I'm sure it must have been quite a burden for you to appreciate the reality of where this is, how far this has gone.
Well, so coincidentally, I had the challenging task of being the one to inform them that the test results came out positive, because the NCDC didn't call them directly, they called me. And having called me, also knowing my own apprehension about going to the isolation center, they wanted me also to be an ambassador for them. in marketing the idea that it's not so bad at the isolation center. So they actually called me and gave me the news, and it was like confirmation of my very worst fears. Coincidentally, Friday, 1st of May, was also my second daughter's birthday. And when I had spoken to her, I know her two wishes was, one, that I get better, and two, that she sees me. Coincidentally, that same Friday, 1st of May, I woke up exactly 1 minute past midnight. And the first thing I realized as soon as I woke up is that my sense of smell had returned. I put something in my mouth and I could taste it. So I felt already on the 1st of May fine. By that time, I had finished my full dosage of malaria tablets. The remaining symptoms of COVID, apparently my lack of taste and smell had disappeared. So in my mind, I was thinking to myself, my God, Isabella, be careful what you wish for. You know, and it so happened that I did feel better, and I did see them, but it was definitely heartbreaking to see them all in the facility. My dad is an old soldier, as I like to call him. I know he has underlying conditions, and because of his age, I was particularly worried for him. You know, but then as well, my younger children, because they do not fully understand or appreciate how contagious COVID is or can be, it was a very big burden for me to see and to have them around, and it is one of the things which really kept me anxious throughout the period in which they were in the facility, because in as much as the facility is fine for me and for any adult, it's not necessarily a facility which is designed for children or to be child friendly. The children go out to the toilets, they go out to other places, they touch things, they want to play. Everybody that smiles at them, they want to engage with and play with as well. And you know, as far as kids are concerned, they are not conscious of the fact that people are being treated here as they are going out. Fresh people are coming in who apparently are also COVID positive, and even if they have their symptoms, they didn't have symptoms, they were completely asymptomatic, I should say. But even if their condition was improving, there's always the risk of getting reinfected and all of that. So definitely for the duration that they were in that facility, I did not sleep well a single night. I had my first good sleep the day they left, at least the day my eldest and my youngest and my dad left. And then the very next day, obviously, myself and my middle...
Which was a good thing that they recovered much earlier than you did.
Yes.
You've talked about the testing procedure there. In fact, your initial comment when you came out has gained a whole lot of traction on online and social media. A lot of Nigerians are talking about it. A lot of people are also identifying with it, while a lot of people have had questions to ask about it, and even the officials in charge of managing the entire COVID-19 have had to comment on it. You've talked about testing, the fact that even while you were informed personally you've tested positive for COVID-19, your dad, your family members, everybody were informed through you that they had tested positive. You never saw any documentary evidence to that effect. Did it in any way create any doubt in you as far as whether or not you were actually tested for COVID-19 and whether or not what you were told was correct?
Well, absolutely, Tiba. I think first and foremost because I have been in hospitals, not only in Nigeria, but in other parts of the world. And I must say this is my first experience where I have been in a hospital. I've had tests taken, and those, I was not giving any paper to look at my test results where the doctor engaged me on these are the findings of what is on this test results. In the first instance, that was a little bit curious. Secondly, as far as confidence in what it is that the doctors were saying, it's not so much whether I doubted that I had COVID or I didn't doubt that I had COVID, because I had symptoms which I could identify that these are either malaria or COVID symptoms, very close, but loss of taste and smell definitely are more towards COVID than malaria. So, and I could also identify that having spent 5 days, after 5 days, I came in on Monday, by Friday, I felt completely asymptomatic. I felt completely fine. So I could also tell that whatever tablets or medication they were giving me appeared to be working. You know, but it's a lack of confidence in the sense that you also know that you don't have any baselines. When a doctor comes in and says, does the repeat test and says you are still positive, what are the baselines? Am I improving? Am I getting worse? I know Nigeria is participating in the World Health Organization Solidarity Program. The Solidarity Program is a program funded by the World Health Organization, essentially where patients are tested with different drugs to see the efficacy of those drugs and how well patients respond to different kinds of medication. I know also that there are no approved drugs for COVID-19, and yet I'm giving this concoction of medications to take. At one point, I was counting, I was taking 30, 40 tablets in a day. And I don't have any baseline levels to see whether I'm improving or whether I'm not improving, whether other things are going wrong. Am I a medical volunteer in the Solidarity Program? I did not sign up for that. Yet I cannot leave the isolation center. I am compelled to remain there until I test negative twice. Doctors are coming in every day to take my readings, and I felt at some point like I'm a lab rat. The basic decent thing that I would expect from any medical authorities essentially is to discuss my results with me and to show me that this is the level that you are at, this is what this means, this is what that means, and as you do more tests, so that I have an appreciation of what my own health condition also is.
Did you make such inquiries of the doctors? And the
Absolutely, I did make inquiries. I'm not going to quote them what the response was. But essentially they had made it clear to me that they themselves do not have access to some of those results, and it's the NCDC and the laboratories that are dealing and handling with that. And I did see the response on social media yesterday evening from the NCDC that, you know, they do not give results to patients, they send them to the states who then give, well, first and foremost, that is a breach of doctor-patient confidentiality. I gave my test to a doctor in confidence. How can you send my results to another third party? I mean, there are ethical questions, I think, around that, particularly when third parties, so there are people in maybe Ministry of the FCD or FCDA who have my test results. I, the patient, don't have it. I think it's something that certainly the authorities have to look at and reconsider as far as their policies are concerned.
You've talked about the concoction of drugs that you were given. I suppose this applied not just to you, but several other patients there.
Of course.
Do you get a sense of whether or not there was any testing or prior inquiries made to individual patients there to know whether or not their system can assimilate these particular regimen of drugs, or it was more or less like a blanket application to everyone?
Well, so I cannot speak for everyone because I wasn't present when everyone was being given their drugs. But I do know that my wife, my kids, my dad, one of our other members of staff was also at the isolation center. I also spoke to her, and there was someone else I had also spoken to. First and foremost, when you're doing the COVID tests, they do ask you if you have any underlying conditions and all of that. But they didn't ask whether I am taking, for example, any other medications which might conflict in their interaction with the medications that they were giving me. I personally do not take any other medications, but like my dad, for example, he is constantly on some other medications. Whether they took that into consideration when they gave him his own concoction of medications, I do not know. I do know that I was given, one of the drugs I was given is augmentin. He wasn't given augmentin, he was given a variant of that. Whether that was a consideration or they simply didn't have augmentin, I do not know.
Was there any side reactions to any of these drugs that you've personally felt?
Well, there is the, I wouldn't say side reactions. I know my wife and kids reacted badly. Or rather my wife and my sister especially, because they were vomiting and rejecting. Particularly there was a retroviral drug, Alluvia, which is used in the treatment of HIV patients.
That was administered as well?
Yes, that was administered. So apparently what this drug is supposed to do is supposed to stop the replication of
the COVID cells.
Of the COVID cells. Whilst your immune system fights the thing. So they reacted quite badly to that. I do know that whilst I was taking that, I'm still taking it, but at the earlier stages I did have some abdominal cramps. And I think there was also an increased case of like diarrhea for the first week or so that I was put on those drugs. But beyond that, personally, I was determined to just go with the procedure, take all the tablets that I was given. At that point, if I had known I was not going to see my test results throughout, I probably wouldn't have taken anything. But at that point, I still had faith that I was going to receive my test results, and so I was just keen to do everything that was necessary as prescribed.
Your father, the founder, said something after he also was discharged from the hospital. He said everything he had in terms of the drugs he was asked to take was more or less similar to what he takes for malaria, and basically the symptoms were similar to what symptoms any ordinary Nigerian or African, sub-Saharan Africa will feel if they have malaria. And that's also generated a whole lot of controversy in the public space, and whether or not there's a doubt in some quarters that we really have COVID-19 in Nigeria.
Well, I think the question he asked is malaria COVID-19.
Yes.
And I think it is a legitimate question. At the same time, it is simplistic to conclude on that. Let me explain. What do we know about COVID? Everything we know about COVID essentially is from what we have seen on foreign media. It is from what experts, mostly from foreign countries, have said about COVID, and the expert reports and opinions that have been expressed also on foreign media. COVID, the novel coronavirus 2019, is, they call it SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 essentially is a respiratory problem tied with other common flu drugs or common flu ailments. In China, like in most of Europe and in the United States of America, you have winter at this period. And so the predominance is with cough, it is with flu, it is with all of that. And this is the major means through which COVID is spread. It is not that we do not have cough and flu and all of that here in Nigeria, but statistically speaking, it is minute in comparison to what other countries are experiencing. What we do have in Africa, and we have quite a lot of in Nigeria, is malaria. Now, 20% of all COVID-infected persons tend to end up in hospital, meaning 80%. If you are in Europe, it is like you have an ordinary flu. And I'm sure you will have seen on foreign media, people say, just isolate at home. It's like your regular flu, your body will deal with it, and you go away. Here, we do not have that regular flu. We have malaria. So it's possible that, treat yourself for like malaria, and let your body do the rest of it and to go away. The flu attacks essentially and inflames your respiratory tract, your lungs, etc., which kind of makes COVID more dangerous in Western societies. Malaria does not necessarily have that same impact. So is the COVID that we have here in Nigeria or in Africa as aggressive or as dangerous as it is that they have in Europe or China?
Valid question, because we understand that in Europe there's a lot of use of ventilators in the treatment of patients.
Absolutely.
But you were there, and other members of your family were there. Were you exposed to any ventilator?
So, every day the doctors did various tests, blood pressure, temperature, etc. They also did oxygen saturation levels. If your oxygen saturation drops below a particular level, they start getting concerned and they put a oxygen machine to help you breathe more easily. Essentially, one of those machines was brought into my room. I used it maybe 1 or 2 days, but after which I found it completely unnecessary because my oxygen saturation consistently was in the 90s, 95 to 100. Every patient that I had spoken to in that facility and also in my engagement with doctors complained more of malaria than they did of any kind of respiratory problem. Now, that is not to say that you do not have respiratory issues. A patient died whilst I was in the isolation center, and one of our staff was actually next door to him and could hear him. And I understand from her eyewitness accounts that he was struggling with oxygen. So you cannot completely just wave your hand and dismiss the fact that there's respiratory challenges with COVID. But one of the things you also find, because I had a lot of free time in the isolation center, obviously being an interested party, I was doing a lot of research. I came across several research documents, and I think it is now very well documented and accepted in the medical community that having done autopsies on people who have died from COVID, what is actually killing people is what is called thrombosis. Thrombosis essentially is blood clots getting into your lungs or getting into your heart arteries, which prevents or makes more difficult your ability to breathe and all of that. Even amongst people who are in the ICU, where you have so much people dying abroad who are on ventilators, essentially it's not so much because they have challenges breathing, it's because these blood clots are getting into their lungs and getting into their hearts, and it's causing strokes, it's causing different sorts of organ failure. And that is one area and one particular reason where COVID-19 could possibly be dangerous. And I think now that we have over 5,000 cases of COVID here in Nigeria, I think it is high time for our doctors, our researchers, and our the various agencies responsible to start doing some primary research based on what it is that we are experiencing here. The index case of COVID in Nigeria, if I'm not mistaken, was the Italian who came in. I think that
Absolutely.
was about 27th of February. So this is more than 2 months later. I have seen journals practically on a daily basis. New research is released abroad. How much research is actually released based on what we are seeing locally in Nigeria and what our response is locally in Nigeria? Do mosquitoes transmit COVID? It's a question which abroad they have not been able to conclude. But then abroad they are dealing primarily with winter and with flu symptoms, which is the primary way through which these things are being transmitted. I think in Nigeria, in Africa, studies into things like is COVID transmissible via mosquito bites is much more important to us, and should definitely be looked at and looked into.
All right, finally, you've also talked about how your experience they gave you an exposure into the practical limitations of the system in ensuring that even with best intentions, that public health meets objectives in the face of COVID-19 that are achieved and are sustained. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, essentially, there are two ways to look at it. First and foremost, from the isolation policy itself. The fact that you have COVID in Nigeria, the policy as it is that once you are confirmed positive, you go into the isolation center.
Yeah.
And you are there to you test consecutively 2 times. Now it has been reduced to you test consecutively once. But the issue fundamentally is, for someone like myself, I felt like I had malaria symptoms and I was treated for malaria, and after a couple of days I started feeling remarkably well. All my tests and everything that were being taken, my daily vitals, were showing excellent readings. Did I need to remain in the isolation center or in the treatment center beyond that point? Personally, I felt not. Of course, there is a risk that if I go out, I might be contagious and infect other people. But I also have the opportunity to isolate myself at home where those risks do not arise. I do know at the same time that I think there was even an incident where somebody, is it Federal Road Safety Corps, someone collapsed in Gwagwalada there. And the NCDC did not respond to him for 24 hours. He was just there on the road. And there's been scarcities of beds and all of that. And the key issue is, if there are 1,000 infected people with COVID and you only have bed space for 100, and 20% of the 1,000 people need hospitalization or they have underlying conditions which necessitates that they come into a facility, does it make sense to fill the 100 beds that you have with completely asymptomatic patients when there are those who are out there who actually
desperately need bed space?
Desperately need that bed space and medical facilities. So that is one question that I was asking in saying all of this. The second aspect of it is that there are serious limitations and challenges with our testing. First and foremost, we do in Nigeria what we call the PCR. It's the most effective way of testing whether you are positive or negative. But when they do take the samples, that only lasts 24 hours before they are condemned. So there is a limitation to how many testing machines we have and how many tests we are able to do on a daily basis. Going by how long it takes, even from when you do your test to when you get your results, it's very obvious and very apparent that a lot of those test swabs would be useless by the time it is inputted into the machine. And for those that are not, after 3 or 4 days, even if you are negative and you remain in an environment where there are other people who are positive, fresh people are coming in, your chances of reinfection are still very high.
Exposure rate, yeah.
Exposure rate is very high. So as soon as you test that you are negative, ideally you should be released. It's no good keeping me still there for another 4 or 5 days before I get to know my results, by which time I could be negative, but I may have been reinfected, and when I'm discharged, I'm positive again. So all these kinds of risks and issues definitely are areas in which I know the government is doing its best. I know everybody who I interacted with gave me assurances that they have ways of containing those issues. The alluvia that the retroviral drug that we are taking is supposed to limit how contagious we are when we go out and all of that. But notwithstanding, these are challenges which I thought needed to be flagged for decision makers who are there to make the right decisions, look at and take necessary action.
You were discharged on Saturday. Looking back from your experiences there at the treatment center and now, does it leave you with hope that Nigeria is on the right track to dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
It's a difficult question, to be honest with you. But I'm I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical expert. There is a limitation to what I can say. What I can say for sure, and what I can say based on my experience in the Gwagwalada Isolation Center, is that if you are ill and if you are positive and you are taken there, you are likely going to be treated very well. I cannot say whether my experience in Gwagwalada is representative of the experience of patients around the country. Certainly, you know, as I said, the lack of data, the lack of information, it raises a lot of questions and a lot of doubts as to whether COVID is really as dangerous as it is. We know that the pictures that we've seen from abroad, people on ventilators and all of that, that is definitely not our experience. At least based on what I have seen in Gwagwalada, that is not the experience. So is it as dangerous as it is abroad? These are questions, I think, for our researchers and our science communities and medical communities to answer. But certainly, I will say this. Generally, when I hear Donald Trump speak, I take everything he says with a huge teaspoon of salt. Notwithstanding, I do sincerely believe that there is a positive connotation between taking the chloroquine drugs, taking the zinc, taking the azithromycin drugs in combination in getting better. Because when I was given the concussions of medicines on Monday, I started Monday evening. I was not given the zinc. And I started with the zinc on Wednesday, essentially. And as I said, by Friday, I was completely fine. It was like nothing was ever wrong with me. The rest of the time, as far as I'm concerned, I spent resting, you know, without much capacity to move around. So, yes, I do have optimism that if you are in the facility, you will be fine. But whether everybody who tests positive should be taken to the facility, I have my question marks.
All right. That closely gets me to the next question, which is the issue of stigmatization. It was quite interesting that you came out openly, publicly, and said, yes, I have COVID-19. Your journey all through, a lot of Nigerians were following it till when you came out. Were you concerned at some point that because of the media reporting surrounding this thing and the, you know, flip side of it is the panic which it has created in the minds of the people, that you may be affected one way or the other? Probably you will come back to the office and your staff would not want to come close to you.
Well, to be honest, at the time when I was sending out the message, I was not expecting it to go viral.
Yeah.
Not that I minded. I had it at the back of my mind, and I think I also had communicated it to you at some point that having sent this message now, it's only a matter of time until it is leaked and everybody gets to know about it. But my primary concern definitely was for those whom I have interacted with, whom I've been in close contact with, and trying to ensure that if we had not been aggressive enough in pushing NCDC to come and do tests here for us, for our staff, that now is the time essentially to really push very, very hard for that. We do work in the media. We are at the front line of exposure, and it cuts across board because our reporters go into the streets, they come back into the offices, they report to their superiors, superiors have meetings with management, management has meetings with board. So we are all exposed, and you know, as far as I was concerned, the first and foremost thing was to ensure that our staff got properly tested, and whoever was in need had that. Speaking of stigmatization, I must say that since the news got out, I had an outpour. I was so humbled. I had an outpour of love and people calling me, sending me messages. I took screenshots at some point because I said I was going to send appreciation messages whenever I got out. to every single person who contacted me, and I had 600 and something PDF pages of messages alone, over 3,000 messages from people, all walks of life, people who have been high up there in government, people who have worked with me, or just Uber drivers who have taken me and have my number, you know, and it was really touching to be able to have that love and appreciation, and I believe that it was one of the things that kept my spirits very high and very strong at a time which ordinarily should have been the lowest for me in my life. So I think Nigerians are generally good people who know you and who appreciate you, will definitely show you love. There is definitely the stigmatization. I do recall, even whilst I was in the Gwagwalada facility, the yard in which they said we can walk around, essentially because it's new, it's still a construction site. There were all sorts of nails and other things there, and I didn't feel it was safe for my children to run out and play. So just in front of that, there was a car park which is not used. And I said, okay, instead of playing in that yard where there are nails and everything, let's walk around and play in the car park, in the forecourt. And you would have people from the security kind of approach us there to say, you are not supposed to go beyond this line. You know,
so you felt, at that point, you felt a sense of restriction.
Of course,
as far as the freedom is concerned,
of course, because I felt, first and foremost, I'm not approaching you people. You coming to meet me here, you are the one putting yourself in danger. Secondly, I've reliably been informed that this, the reason why there are no cars here, essentially is because patients and everybody are brought in through here to come in. So if I am a patient and patients come through here, patients move within this area. Yeah. Whether it is only for them to come in or whether I cannot come out, how does it concern you that you're on the other side of this car park? Why are you coming to meet me to stigmatize me that I should be constrained to one particular area? My kids are not animals that you just tie in a cage and say they should not come out of their rooms the whole day. Besides, I also need a little bit of movement. I need a little bit of exercise. Yes. You know, so there's a little bit of that, and I'm sure it will be interesting. I'm yet to find out. Since I've come in, I've not gone anywhere. But
so we'll wait for the social experiment to continue.
If by this evening I don't get phone calls from my friends inviting me for a drink of pepper soup, I will know that the stigmatization is real.
Raymond, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. It's really exhilarating, and we hope this also helps people to see the reality of the COVID-19. It's not really a death sentence, as a lot of people have perceived it to be. A lot of people are recovering. He has recovered. Members of his family have recovered as well, and more are recovering. And once again, congratulations for having you back here.
Thank you so much, Utiba. It was a real pleasure, and it's a pleasure to be back.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Raymond Dokpesi Jr. is the chairman of the board of DAAR Communications PLC, speaking about his experiences on his return from treatment for the COVID-19. That's it on this special interview. Do stay along for the rest of COVID Watch.